The recent fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria has raised several questions about the future of the country's notorious Captagon trade, called the poor man's cocaine. And this highly addictive amphetamine-like pill was a major source of revenue for the former regime, with estimates suggesting that it generated some $5.6 billion annually. Now, the Captagon trade has its roots in the early 2010s, when the Syrian regime began to produce and export this pill as a way to generate revenue. With this economy broken by war, sanctions and the mass displacement of Syrians abroad, the Captagon trade quickly grew, with the pill finding its way into the hands of young users in countries such as Saudi Arabia, Jordan and Lebanon. Captagon was the brand name of a stimulant first produced in Germany in the 1960s to help treat attention conditions including deficit disorders and narcolepsy. It was discontinued, but an illicit version of the drug continued to be produced in Eastern Europe and later in the Arab world. While the drug continues to ravage West Asia, Captagon has been banned by many countries, including the US. Due to its harmful side effects, some of the side effects include psychosis, visual hallucinations, visual distortions, acute heart failure, seizures, and heart attacks. The Captagon trade has fueled violence and corruption, with criminal gangs and corrupt officials profiting from this trade. Now, according to reports, the Assad regime has been deeply involved in this Captagon trade. Following the ouster of Bashar al-Assad, videos filmed by Syrians raiding properties allegedly owned by relatives of Assad show rooms full of pills being made and packaged, hidden in fake industrial products. Reuters reports captured footage of an abandoned site in the city of Douma. Here, rebel fighters gave access to reporters showing how thousands of pills were hidden in furniture, fruit, decorative pebbles and voltage stabilizers stacked on pallets, with a trailer waiting outside. Now, many of the pills were stamped with the double crescent logo or the word Lexus that identifies Captagon pills. When Ahmad al-Shara, formerly known as al-Julani, and his group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS arrived in Damascus, the rebel leader said that Syria has become the biggest producer of Captagon on earth and vowed to purify the country. But there is a broader question. What effect will the loss of such a lucrative trade have on Syria's economy? The Captagon trade has provided a livelihood for millions of Syrians. Experts believe it will be difficult to simply cut them off without providing alternative sources of income. Once al-Shara cracks down on the trade, there are fears that alternative drugs like crystal meth will fill that void. Experts say in order to address the issue, the role of the international community is in providing support and resources to HTS will be crucial to address this issue. All right, to discuss this further, we're now being joined by Omer Ozgezilchik, non-residential fellow at the Atlantic Council. Omer, thank you so much for joining me here on the broadcast. As far as this trade is concerned, given the figures that have come out, how will al-Shara deal with people in Syria addicted to Captagon, number one, and what do you reckon will happen with Syria's multi-billion-dollar drug empire next?
So first of all, we have to clearly assess what has he done in the previous time. So when he was basically controlling the region of Idlib, he was crushing on the drug trafficking, and he had, and the governance structure, they had a huge emphasis on preventing drug smuggling into Idlib from the Assad regime. So this was a huge issue, as it was quite difficult to prevent the drug smuggling into Idlib from regime-held areas, as the production was flourishing in Damascus and regime-held areas. Now, the new government in Syria has clearly made clear their intention to end the drug production in Syria altogether. And they have clearly stated that the change in Syria is also a change in drug production and also in interest of the health of the entirety of the world. However, that being said, this will be something that we have to follow, because the drug production in Syria was mainly driven by Hezbollah, Iran-associated Syrian figures. So it was not the Russian-affiliated Syrian regime officials who were involved in this drug production and smuggling, but the pro-Iranian ones. As we know, Iran and Hezbollah have a huge income and revenue from drug production in Lebanon and also elsewhere. So with the Iranian loss in Syria, I expect that drugs production in Syria will decrease vehemently, and I do not think that there will be a state policy to produce drugs as a form of revenue income. That being said, we have to be wary. This does not mean that drug production will altogether cease. It may be cease in Syria, but I expect Iran to relocate and re-establish drug production facilities in Iraq and try to expand its drug production site in Lebanon. Because, as you know, the Israeli airstrikes have decimated Hezbollah and the Iranian logistic line and the Iranian Shia militias. They will try to rebuild, they will try to regroup, and for that there is a need for money. And drug money is one of the easiest and fastest revenue incomes that Iran has been used and Hezbollah has been used for years. And I think they will try it again.
Omer, as far as the figure that we mentioned earlier in the report as well, $5.6 billion annually. Now, if you cut this out from the economy, how do you suppose an absence of this kind of figure, which was definitely a source of income for several, how will that impact Syria's economy? Because as of now, Syria really needs to regroup. It needs to start afresh.
First of all, this number you have mentioned is one of the modest estimations. Some estimations go up to 16 billion even.
I hear you.
But the issue here is this money was not brought into the Syrian economy. This money was only used by a small circle of associates of the Assad regime and Iran. So this money did not go into Syria at all. And we're seeing the situation in Syria, as I was there for 10 days, and we were seeing the regime's main support base in Latakia, this money did not reach the people. It was basically an instrument to finance the corrupt regime system in Syria. So what Syria now needs is not an income from drug. What Syria needs is the lifting of sanctions, the regain of control of the oil production sites in Syria, and a new global effort to rebuild and reconstruct Syria. If that is being provided, the economical gain out of lifting the sanctions, including Syria back into the banking system, international banking system, and having international funds to reconstruct and rebuild Syria, is way bigger than any drug money can become an income. And more importantly, this money is legal in contrast to the drug money, because the new government in Syria wants to be legal. It wants to be accepted in the international system. And there's a real desire to be part of the legal international framework. And as part of this desire, I think they will not depend on drug production, and they will focus more on sanctions being lifted, and for that, drug production is something that goes against their interests.
Omer Ozkizilchik, thank you so much for joining me on the broadcast, sharing all your insights. Of course, Syria is a very developing story at this point. We will really need to wait and watch how the new regime or the new government comes about and tackles this major problem of Captagon.